I'm doing well. So it would be, is it 6 p.m. for you right now, I guess?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so we're opposite ends of the time spectrum. It's around 7 a.m. here, so good to
Firstly,
be talking with you.
awesome. Firstly, thank you very much for coming to my show and accepting to be on my show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So I've gone through your profile. I came to know that you are a cloud architect.
Yeah, you could say that. Yep.
So I thought to tell about you and the work that you are doing and the work experience of yours to my audience.
Sure. So most of my career was actually spent working for like large companies, large enterprise in technology. So I started out um, back in the back in the day where you had physical servers for everything. So every company had physical servers. There was not a lot of, virtual machines were really coming into the technology spectrum. So you had all these data centers everywhere, all these physical servers, and you had all the networking that would connect them. So some of the first big, interesting, and cool things I got to work on was the transition of these physical servers to virtual servers, virtual compute, because it's just um, more efficient to say, okay, for instead of for every application I have to deploy a physical server, I can deploy batches of physical servers, sort of like on demand through something like VMware. So that coming into the world in that way for technology and really getting my feet wet with Linux. I was a big Linux user for a long time, and that really helped. But that sort of led me through the enterprise space, getting into like network engineering. I spent a lot of time designing and building like enterprise networks in sort of like a data center type capacity. Getting old technologies out of the data center, like you've maybe never heard of it, but CatOS, it's an old Cisco operating system. So getting that out of the data center, bringing in like Nexus 7010s and onto like spine and leaf fabric stuff. So from when cloud sort of took over and started eating the whole world, pretty much everybody wants to use cloud. Everybody, Kubernetes. Kubernetes is the new everything. But when cloud started really catching in the enterprise space, we started testing it out. And I think I set up my first AWS environment like over 10 years ago. It's been a long time. But yeah, cloud started catching fire, and then as enterprise, the companies I worked for started growing in cloud, they started increasingly looking at multi-cloud because they would maybe buy a company that was like created in another cloud. So they acquire this company, and then they're automatically multi-cloud, whether they wanted to become multi-cloud or not wanted to become multi-cloud. It just kind of happened. So through a lot of that work that I did in like cloud architecture in the enterprise, um, ended up working with a company called Alkira. It's a startup out of Silicon Valley that does multi-cloud networking and basically takes an approach of like network as a service, to sort of make all the networking between everything a little easier for the enterprise, abstract a lot of things and make it kind of do it the cloud way. So I ended up jumping ship and going to work for them, and that's where I am now as a principal cloud architect, where I do a lot of multi-cloud stuff, a little bit of thought leadership, a little bit of conferences, a lot of automation, a lot of connecting with customers, and really, understanding, kind of shortening the feedback loop between us and customers, and getting close to customers and seeing what they're seeing, understanding what they're doing, and helping, iterate and build new things into the product.
So, what is your responsibility exactly?
So my responsibility exactly, so if most companies will have they'll have engineering, they'll have marketing usually, and they'll have maybe solutions and sales. let's say they have those four pillars or those four verticals. So a lot of times, if you're working for a big company, or you're, the bigger a company gets, you have this tower of, let's say sales, and sales can get really focused in sales, all sales all the time, and they get so focused. And then there's also, sometimes you have to like zoom out a little bit and like look at the forest from the trees. So I would say that, like, from my perspective, I work across these different verticals and help out a little bit with each one. So I go in and understand, let's say Terraform integration. So we have a Terraform provider that can, interact with our solution. And Terraform is sort of the de facto infrastructure as code tool for most either multi-cloud or cloud deployments for deploying your infrastructure as code. So I do a lot of testing, building modules, just kind of understanding, okay, how does a customer going to use Terraform, and making sure, coming back to our product team and saying, okay, this is what customer's doing, and this is probably what customer's going to want to do at this time in the future. This is what we need to try to help prioritize to make sure that the customer is successful. And then I also will work with engineering accordingly on some of these features to test them. Test, and make sure all the use cases are accounted for as we approach some release and get the new features out to the customer. So that would be like one example.
So a few examples that from your present work.
Sure. So one of the areas that networking is, if you think of like computer networking in general, and you work in the enterprise space, you might think slow. The network folks are usually slow to get things done, and a lot of that is a little bit of misunderstanding. But if you look at the technology that actually underpins like networking as a whole, even the protocol that runs the internet. So let's look at BGP, or Border Gateway Protocol. So this protocol that runs the internet that we're using right now was initially conceived back in the 80s, and it runs on TCP. And to say it's a routing protocol, its primary function is to manage how traffic or packets really are routed across the internet through basically the exchange of routing and reachability information. So BGP, for all of the good things it does, it's also susceptible to, I'd say, malicious attacks, even human error, fat fingering things. So if a new sort of a bogus route is announced, either intentionally, accidentally, however it may happen, it can send, that traffic to the wrong network, and it can, spread like wildfire across the internet. So this is kind of what you saw in a sense with Facebook. So the Facebook outage that happened I'd say towards the end of 2021, like on the surface it looked like DNS, but the actual root cause analysis of the whole thing ended up being surrounding BGP, this protocol that runs the internet. So another thing that is a company that we try and focus on is like all these little things that a customer can tailor and they can tweak and they can do from their end to solve certain problems. How do we abstract like some of the pain points away from the customer? So while BGP and some of these technologies have a lot of metrics, they have a lot of tweaking you can do, a lot of knobs you can turn. And if you do all of these things ad hoc on your own, sometimes that can lead to problems, even with, designing like large scale cloud. So say that like in the cloud world, you're designing for really availability. Like you want your application to be up all the time. And the application, maybe the front end of it lives in the cloud, but the back end of it still lives in your technology stack back in your data centers. And you want to have as much availability as possible, but you've designed, you know, hindsight is 2020. You do your best at the time based on the technology that's available to you and your time and your resources. But sometimes you can kind of paint yourself in a corner, and you design with like single points of failure. Maybe would be an example. So like looking at the way that our solution works is like trying to abstract and take away some of those potential holes that you can fall in terms of availability, and providing a solution that can, you know, basically be available as much as possible for the customer, so they don't have to deal with some of these small tweaking of some of the legacy technologies that can kind of get you into trouble sometimes.
So how you tackle problems, how you understand the requirements of your clients, and how much time you take to create uh, uh, something that they need.
That's a really good question. So our founders, the two folks that founded Alkira, they were actually pioneers in the SD-WAN space. So one of the companies that they had started and actually sold to Cisco, the routing company, was called Viptela, which is now Cisco SD-WAN. So one of the things that make the founders of Alkira really special is their product and customer focused. And in terms of like, okay, what are the pain points that the customer really has, and getting down like at the level of the customer to understand exactly what's happening so that they can build something that's useful. And that's exactly what they did with this multi-cloud stuff, because me on the, you know, I sort of, one of the things that I have as far as a personal experience is I was on the other side of the customer trying to solve some of these problems in the customer space. And once you start juggling like multiple clouds, things get very difficult because every cloud sort of does something different, and they do it a different way. So for networking, for instance, like a simple example would be like if you're a customer and you're trying to connect privately to a cloud, you can provision something called a direct connect, and then in Azure you have an express route, in Google you have an interconnect, and you know OCI or Oracle you have a fast connect. Well, if you connect all of these, and they all require a separate BGP configuration. They all require, depending on your organization and what industry you're in, like healthcare, for instance, like there's different requirements that you have to have in place for HIPAA, and PHI is a big deal. So making sure you're meeting all those segmentation requirements and isolating and segmenting everything. So each cloud, you know, although AWS has a VPC and Azure has a VNet, they all have different knobs you can turn to, you know, influence behavior differently. So the more clouds you get in, the deeper knowledge of expertise you have to have in each one before you can really bring together a holistic solution. And we do a really good job of just kind of taking, instead of thinking of it as like a VPC or a VNet, or whatever Oracle calls it, I forgot at this point, VCN. Instead of thinking of it as all these, you know, 4 different constructs, you think about it as like one construct with us, one security enforcement construct, one, you know, if you're using security groups, one security group enforcement construct. So ultimately, the customer experience is going to be better when they have to worry about less things. So instead of having to keep track of 5 different things across multiple different areas, you know, that multiplies exponentially in the hundreds. That number drastically reduces. So the less complexity, the easier the experience.
So you started your technology career as team lead.
I'm sorry, what was that? I think we got a little bit of fuzz there.
You started your technical career as a team lead.
Yeah. So, well, so if you're looking at my LinkedIn profile, I have some history in there before there, because I started LinkedIn at some point, and you know that was just the case. But I actually started out Really my career started out in when I was a kid, to be honest. My parents went grocery shopping one day. This is like back in the late 90s and or sometime in the 90s, and they had a computer, and I was like really obsessive with Linux. I really liked Linux and just messing around with it. And they had like Windows 98 or something, and I like when they were at the grocery store, they left me home, and I took Windows 98 off and put like Slackware Linux on, and was just like messing with it because I wanted to, set up a file and print server at home. And they got back and they were not too happy. They're like, why did you mess up our computer? And then of course at that time I couldn't put Windows back on because I was just a kid. And from that time, like I didn't like at that point in my little pea brain, I didn't realize that you could have a career around that stuff, like doing technology, because I was young. But as soon as I realized that, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, from a pretty early age. So I actually did some consulting before I graduated, what we call high school here, where I was doing sort of like P2B migrations, physical to virtual migrations for like small to medium sized businesses. Even doing everything from running new copper, setting up networking, just anything I could really do in the space, because it was like, wow, I can make money for something I actually enjoyed doing. This is fantastic, because I had a small stint with fast food, and that was a hard job. Fast food, that's a very hard job. I was a fish fry at a fish place we had around here, and it was like all hot and throwing all this fish in, and I'm like sweating, there's grease everywhere, and like orders are coming back like by the dozens, and it was really stressful. And I have a lot of respect and a lot of admiration for the workers out there that do that day in and day out. I only had to do it for a few years, but it was a tough gig. So that's kind of how I started out in the consulting space. And then eventually, like after that, my primary school experience, I went and worked for a high-speed internet provider in their business class, kind of like business class / knock, doing like operational stuff. And then from there, I went on to the a financial services company that I was with for a long time. And I started out at like a really short stint with help desk, and then I moved on to because like my Linux, like I knew a lot about Linux at that point because I'd messed around with it just in fun so much, and I had a lot of automation background at that point. So I was doing a lot of Bash scripting and Perl scripting, and they had a team that they had built that basically managed like they were like security administrators basically for managing the like non-human accounts, like service accounts and whatnot, and the provisioning of like new Linux servers and configuration. And they did all that stuff manually. So like I was like showing them, well, if you kind of like what you could do with Bash scripting and Perl scripting, and this was a long time ago, but they were like, hey, come over and work for us and just do this all the time. So that's what I did. And then from there, I moved over to the networking side of the house, doing like network engineering. And network engineering, when cloud came along, you sort of just had to learn cloud. And then, cloud started happening. And then the more I got into that space, I used to do a lot of, especially on the load balancer side of the house. I don't know if you've ever heard of like F5 load balancing, NetScaler load balancing, stuff like that. But when, before cloud really exploded, you would host these applications in your own data center. So you'd have like tiers of load balancers. You'd have a web tier, an app tier, and a DB tier. And you'd have these things called virtual IPs. And you may have an external VIP pointing to like an internal VIP, which had backend nodes, or it would actually use the inside VIPs as pull members from the external profile. And you have all this, complexity with, okay, you may have a customer that wants to offload SSL, like all the way down at the server. So you have SSL end to end, but some customers may be fine with offloading it at the load balancer itself. So it's a little easier, but all those things were a lot of configuration. So I did a lot of automation around that with like Python and stuff like that. So I did a lot of coding pretty early on and just got into the automation space to where now I really like Terraform, I gotta say. So I kind of moved on to Ansible and then Terraform, and then yeah, the infrastructure as code thing is really cool. I'm really excited about the new technologies around infrastructure as code, and kind of going from that mutable, deploy something and then go and configure it later to actually doing like everything in the build pipeline and then deploying it. It's just fascinating.
And you become a consultant network engineer after team lead.
Yeah. So that's kind of when I jumped over to healthcare. So I was looking for kind of new, and this was when that thing I talked about, SD-WAN, sort of kicked off and became like very popular. And we had the city that I worked in happened to have this healthcare provider there locally as well. So I went and worked for them, and I did a lot of work around SD-WAN, cutting over sites from like a traditional network, like using something called MPLS to this SD-WAN technology, and some automation in cloud. So when I was there also, we stood up a cloud provider, got the private connectivity set up, and started like architecting the sort of like the scaffolding or the framework for how applications were going to be onboarded. And that was when I touched Azure, Microsoft Azure for the first time, which was really fun. Just getting into a different cloud provider at that point, and kind of seeing the differences. So once you're deep in one cloud provider and then you move to another, you realize how you on a surface level you might think they're really similar and they're like exactly the same, but like once you get in and you start architecting and putting them together, you're like, wow, these are really different. You're almost starting from scratch. Like you have the process, like the overall process for bringing in new technology, but all the details are pretty different. So yeah, I worked there for a little bit, and then there was another larger healthcare provider in the area that I ended up going to as a lead architect, and just doing. Really, the theme was multi-cloud. They were big on multi-cloud, and they're a bigger company. So the larger company that you have, the more likely you are to be multi-cloud, because you may have like different product segments, and these different product segments, they may be their like own costing and their own cost center, and maybe they drive revenue, they make their own money. So if they want to use a particular cloud based on what they're doing, like say that they're really deep into like analytics and they want to use GCP because of Google's rich analytics services, then okay, they're going to use GCP, and we have to figure out how to onboard it and support it for them, because we don't want them to do it. We want to sort of have if you look up Cloud Center of Excellence, we want to have that sort of Cloud Center of Excellence methodology to sort of have a lot of oversight into everything and make sure we establish and have some sort of control to, validate that, PHI data is handled a particular way, or identity and access management, matches the company's policies and, standards.
Then you become associate director, cloud architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've always sort of, like right now I'm an individual contributor, but I've always kind of been, I would say like I've had the opportunity to like move up to some type of leadership or managerial role, I guess. And that was what happened there, in that, I was asked if I'd want to lead a new team that had like a focus in cloud architecture, cloud networking, cloud infrastructure. And it was a team that I had the opportunity to build out from scratch and completely new. Started out with 0 team members, so I was a one-person team for quite a while. I was doing the hiring and building it up, but it gave me the opportunity though to kind of take some of my leadership skills and my technical skills, which I've grown a lot technically over those years in cloud, and find the right people. And so we ended up with a really awesome, really diverse team, and that are really a difference maker in their business still today. And just from a technical standpoint, from an infrastructure and networking standpoint, like going through and making sure that, okay, we know that these applications, they require a consistent, reliable infrastructure to run on. How do we provide that consistent, reliable infrastructure? How do we document it? And how do we, say that a few folks leave and we have new folks come on? Like, how do we make the onboarding of anybody new coming in better? Like, how do we make their experience successful from day one? Because nobody likes coming into a hot mess, the dumpster fire, as they say, and having like no knowledge, no documentation, no anything to work with. That's tricky. I've been in that situation many times, and I didn't like it, and I would say that nobody else would probably like it either. So, building that intake for new employees coming in, and just trying to make, I'm pretty good at a few things, but there's a lot of folks out there that are better and a lot more knowledgeable about different areas than I am. So that's another thing about building a team is I don't want to hire somebody like me. No way. I want to hire somebody that is like different than me and is like stronger in other areas. And so that's what I sort of focused on doing and sort of building this team. And that gives you a kind of a diverse vantage point, and you see different things that you didn't see before. And of course, there's if you hire skilled people, listen to them. What are they telling you? And, make sure that they have an opportunity to grow so they don't want to leave. Create an environment that they want to work in, a positive environment, and give them the tools necessary to both grow their knowledge and grow their career. So that was sort of my approach with building out that team, and it worked really well for me.
So tell me about Humana.
Yeah, so Humana is they're just a large health insurance provider, and they're sort of on the tip of the iceberg as far as like bleeding edge. Healthcare. If you talk to anybody in America about healthcare, they're going to complain about their healthcare. It's awful. Like it's terrible. It's expensive. It doesn't care about my health or well-being. You'll hear many different responses to that. But one of the cool things with Humana is they really focused on the transition of like what is called like fee-for-service healthcare to like value-based healthcare. So like focusing on the health and well-being of the individual first, and then if you make that your focus, then hopefully everything else falls into place. And there's a lot of areas that our healthcare system can be improved, and Humana was. And I got to say, when I joined Humana, I had some of those impressions as well. I was like, it's all the healthcare providers' fault. It's a big greedy corporation, and like yada yada yada, because I had to pay off some pretty expensive medical bills at some point. Of course, I had a few different surgeries over the years that were pretty expensive, and I'm going into Humana and actually seeing sort of seeing the system from the inside out, and sort of seeing there's so many passionate people there that put everybody else before themselves and are really trying to, because Humana is one company, the healthcare system is the healthcare system. So you're going to have good companies, you're going to have bad companies. And I would say Humana was one of the good companies, and a largely positive experience working there. And they had a rich technical ecosystem too. So I got my hands into a lot of different technologies that I wouldn't have otherwise touched had I not gone there. And they were, one of the cool things about Humana in particular is I had a leader there that I worked for that and kind of came with the approach of I really want to grow my individuals. Once they start hitting that point where they're not learning anymore and they've kind of hit the peak, I want to grow them out of that and put them somewhere where they can continue to be valuable, even if it's not reporting to me, even if it's reporting to someone else. So there was some good leadership there that taught me some really valuable lessons with approaching things that way, because team is a team. It's not about you, it's not about me particularly. The whole team is what's important, and having the whole team act as a team is really not just what makes the team successful, but it makes the department successful, that portion of the business successful, and then the business successful as a whole.
So your connection with blockchain and technology.
That's an interesting one. So I started using. There's a lot of controversy around. I mean, you talk to people and they either love or hate Bitcoin, but it's not just about Bitcoin. So I'm a big advocate for the technology that actually underpins Bitcoin, blockchain. I think we're like our culture is like barely at the tip of the iceberg for the potential of like blockchain technology in general. And blockchain doesn't have to be a currency. A lot of times, like when I talk to folks that are not like well read on the topic, they just think Bitcoin. So automatically blockchain is Bitcoin. There can't be any other use for blockchain outside of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is bad because it uses a lot of power. That's sort of like the line of thinking that I see a lot. And the thing that you have to remember with this whole blockchain thing is like blockchain is like if you think of batteries. So batteries can be used in many different things, in your leaf blowers and your lawnmowers now, and all sorts of things. Battery isn't just something that can be used in a Tesla. So a lot of folks, they might not like Tesla, but you can't say, okay, just because Tesla uses batteries are bad. And that's kind of how I see this blockchain argument going a lot of times. Is I think a lot of folks like lose sight of like all the other opportunities where blockchain can be advantageous to stuff, and one of which is healthcare. So using a different what is called a consensus mechanism, you don't have to use proof of work, which is where you have all these miners and pooling their resources together. There's other consensus mechanisms out there that are not like power hungry, but they still provide the value of consensus for the blockchain in the application or whatever it is. So healthcare and data is like a huge opportunity there, because back to the experience with healthcare, like how often do you get maybe you change employers and you get a new doctor, you're in like a new network and you have to start all over. Like everything you have to start over again. Like what is your name? What is your number? What is your social? What is, you got to do all this stuff. And then they have to go back and talk to some other doctor's office to pull some records. Maybe they can't get the records in time, so they take new scans, they do new things. And when you talk customer experience, hey, that's not a good customer experience for me. I don't like doing that. And I don't think anybody else would like doing that as well. So there's a lot of technologies available to us that can help solve that problem. And blockchain is maybe just one of many in the future. And who knows what the best one is going to be, or what is going to ultimately happen with the healthcare system. But my view on the matter is, if you have a technology like blockchain that provides these capabilities and these values and does it in a way that is better than what we have, why not give it a try? It's not like you have to completely flip the whole system over and convert to something that's underpinned by blockchain it all at once. You start out small. You start out with what's called an MVP, a minimal viable product, and you grow it. So, but I did start out using, it was like back 2011, 2012, when I was doing some of my studies, I had set up these VPSs or VPNs across multiple countries. And I was like learning, like I really, to learn networking, I just wanted to get in and, do stuff because practical, practice by doing is the best way to do it. You can read all the books you want, but until you set up some GRE tunnels and IPsec tunnels and you're doing different things, you're really not going to know your stuff. You really got to do it. So I set up all these cross-continent VPSs, and I was like using Linux tools to basically generate large files just with nothing in them, compress them, and then automating sending them from one country to the other. Just like little things that I was like, let's try this. And I remember on one of these VPS providers, they were like, you can pay in Bitcoin. And I was like, what in the world is a Bitcoin? That's interesting. So I started looking at it, and the more that I started reading about it, and I'm like, hey, why not try it? It's just one new thing out there. So I tried it, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then I was just interested and kept up with it over the years, and even did some mining at one point, and just kind of messed around with it. And that kind of moved me over to Ethereum is a currency because it has like more use cases and different things that it can do in the decentralized finance space. And NFTs are very polarizing right now. I personally don't like. I understand what an NFT is and what the point is, but I just how to get it. Like maybe they will continue to be valuable and they will explode in the future. But me personally, I'm maybe kind of a fad. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there with blockchain and crypto that's just really interesting, and it's so new that really like understanding the possibilities and the capabilities in the future. I think there's going to be a lot of new things come out of that space, specifically with blockchain. That's going to be really interesting and is going to help as far as like anything that's treated as a decentralized. When you look at like distributed systems, like across, if you work in technology, you're very familiar with distributed systems and the challenges with availability and consistency across them. So, looking at how blockchain can sort of help there will be interesting.
Your understanding and creating architecture, and you are leading the team understanding different people's thinking and understanding how to use them to make things possible. And the third one is you are able to understand the requirements of the client and create and move their physical infrastructure to the cloud. So, three different jobs. How you are able to do this? What are the beautiful qualities of yours are making all this possible?
Yeah, so that's a good question. For me anyway, it's going in and giving in my past just career and different things I've worked on, giving 100% even to the things that you don't want to do. Like there was jobs that I couldn't stand. Like there was times I had to work on projects that were not interesting to me. I had no interest in. They just were terrible, over the years. And I still gave 100%. And I think if you always give 100%, no matter how, even when I was like frying fish back in the day, I was a really good fry cook. I gave 100%. I was, my goal coming into this seafood restaurant was to be the best fry cook ever. And if you do that with everything that you work on, then what that is going to do, it may not get you the absolute best job in the world, but it will open up opportunities for you to be seen by different folks that maybe have the opportunity to give you opportunities to fit into these other roles. So that's the best advice I can give in that area is just give 100% and always be on top of your game. You're going to have a few focus areas that you're really deep in. Like my deep focus areas that I've been very deep in, it's going to be like Linux, like network engineering, building scalable networks, and then cloud infrastructure, and also automation around those areas, and a little blockchain thrown in. But like those are the areas that I'm pretty deep in. Well, further educating myself in those areas and, learning all the new technologies that are coming out and keeping up with everything on top of webbing out into other areas and seeing how those areas interconnect with the areas around me is really important. So the infrastructure that I'm building, like how do I understand the application landscape better that's going to live on it? Because not that I have to be an application development expert, or I have to be an expert at designing applications, but how do I understand those things enough to where I know that I'm building the optimal design to run them on top of? And, so understanding and branching out on other areas and figuring out how everything's interconnected. Again, seeing the forest from the trees, zooming out a little bit. And teamwork is always the big thing. If something that I try to do anyway is like my team always, I want to give as much as I can, and that always pays dividends, because if you go out of your way to do things for others around you, then a lot of times you're going to get that in return, which is really valuable, and it helps grow your network. So yes, a lot of technical, but a lot of personable skills too, just to grow those around you, and then they will grow you in return.
Understanding physical infrastructure, understanding the information transfer between computer systems, understanding information transfer between devices, and understanding the data management, understanding the complete machine thing, and when it comes to the human thing, understanding what they need, what actually they are doing, because you worked in hospitality, you worked in different uh, fields, so you understand that human aspect. So how you are able to understand the machine thing and the human thing? Are you AI?
That's funny. That's a good question. Yeah, I'll tell you what. When I first started out working in tech, I was just, this is something that's like a learn by experience thing. The more you can't gain experience and you can't gain wisdom without jumping in and trying things. And that's one thing too. Like I've tried a lot of things in the past. I've had different approaches that have largely failed. Like, okay, I'm going to scratch that one off the list because it didn't work. And that's one thing. You just got to try new things. Try new things, and different things are going to work for different people. But you won't know, and you won't be able to grow yourself unless you try. If you try, and you continually try new things, and it's important to like take yourself out of your comfort zone, because if I always stayed in I would say that my comfort zone is trying to get out of my comfort zone, and that's been successful for me. But a lot of folks will tend to stay in their comfort zone, and if you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to try a lot of new things. But you have to sort of identify those things that might be personality based, they might be just different areas about yourself, and say, hey, I want to get out of that comfort zone. I want to try new things because I know that maybe I'm shy and I don't like talking a lot. Well, on the next call I have at work, I'm going to make sure to, speak up and talk about a few things that are important to me, or that I think are important to this, whatever it is we're working on. So you mentally register that this is something that I don't do often. I'm going to start doing it and seeing how that works. Collecting data from it, seeing what you did good, what you didn't do good, and then retrying it again, sending it through your human pipeline again. And that's the thing. You don't even know what you're capable of. So I've like mentored a few people over the years, and this was me a long time ago. I had a few really good mentors that I look back at that had a very dramatic impact on my life. And, I try to pay that back to some others as well. And when you're younger, you don't know what you're capable of. You have no idea. Everybody has a ton of potential, and getting them out of their comfort zone to go out there and to face head on this world and their job and these different areas and say, hey, I've got a lot of potential. I'm going to try and get all that I can out of this. I'm going to push myself to find what that potential is. I think is pretty important, if that makes sense.
You understand all the services in all the clouds?
Does anybody? I don't think so. I understand. I've worked across most of them, I can tell you that, but I'd say I have a good fun. So there's different services in the cloud that like have not changed in a long time. Like there's I would say the foundational services, like, EC2, VM, security group, VNet, subnet, like the endpoint services, like service endpoints, private link. And those are just some off the top of my head. Like those new features will get released over time, and like, yeah, new services will like be supported by like private link in the future, stuff like that. But as a core service, it kind of acts the same way. Excuse me. So like as far as that's concerned, I'd say I have a good deep understanding of a lot of the core services. But all the new service, I mean, there's new services released at reInvent every year, like by the dozens. And time doesn't allow to understand them all, but I have gotten into a lot of them just to test them out and POC them, or we have maybe a customer that's using something, or when I was on the enterprise side, I'd have a VP to say, hey, this new service came out at reInvent. Can we use it? What does it do? So you go and you read like a release page, and nobody else has really done anything with it. So, okay, how are we going to figure out what it does? Let's go in and mess around with it, set it up, and figure out how it behaves and see if it can help us. So that's sort of where and I've used all the different the Kubernetes services in each cloud, mainly EKS and AWS and AKS and Azure. I did a little bit with GKE and Google Cloud, but not as much. But yeah, those are really popular services as well. A lot of folks want to build their things on Kubernetes now, and for good reason. Using the cloud native, a lot of the stuff that EKS does, like out of the box, if you were to set it up yourself and build Kubernetes out natively by yourself, I did that too at one point, and that's so much harder. There's so much. I'm sort of like having PTSD now, going back and thinking about it. It was a stressful time because it's just a lot. The networking alone is not easy. So
You are into technology from long time. You are seeing the gradual change in technology. So when you started understanding what exactly this is, uh, and now today, what you learned and what is the change that you observed and how it is impacting and influencing humanity?
very good question. So early on in my career, I was kind of a hard lesson I learned is when cloud first came out, like when companies first started to use AWS, and I thought to myself, there's no way that a company will want to take all of their stuff in their data center and put it into this cloud provider, into their data centers that they don't control. That doesn't make sense. And this was a long time ago, so of course my thought process has changed drastically. But I sort of took a stance on that, and I shouldn't have taken that stance. And one thing that taught me over time is when new and disruptive tech comes out, you really can't dismiss anything. There's some things that are just kind of wild and outlandish that you can say, okay, this is something out in left field, but for the most part, you really shouldn't dismiss things, and you really should take a good look at them and think about the problem they're trying to solve, more so than who's putting out the product or some of the other things that you could look at. And if it's solving a problem that people have, then chances are it's going to be a useful product. So never dismiss anything. And I think one of we live in this world where you can start a business in cloud, and you don't have to sign a lease for a physical office anymore. You don't have to build a data center. You don't have to procure servers. You can build a business sitting at home at your desk, and that could turn into a unicorn that's bought out by someone else for billions of dollars. Like, that's the world we live in now. And cloud is one of the things that enables that. So while this is amazing, like, we're honestly, like, I always get excited about technology, and that's why I still work and love tinkering around with stuff. And it's the most exciting time to work in technology is right now. But I think I also, like, as far as like a society and as far as like how it's impacting humanity, I do think that there's consequence, cause and effect. Back when you're in, your grade school, or when you're a child, your parents would teach you, okay, cause and effect. Something happens, there's always an effect to it. And there's always an impact, there's always a trade-off. And one of the things that I see, especially with a lot of new graduates coming out of university and new technologists, is the industry, especially with cloud and everything, they've built so many like abstractions on top of like where things are actually happening. So under everything, you still have electricity, you still have bits going over a wire, going to some switches, which are switching frames to like, that are connected to physical routers that are like routing packets, that are using routing protocols that, so you have all this stuff way down the stack. But the higher we get with all these abstractions, the less that newcomers know about all that stuff way down at the bottom, and the less they want to know. So there's like not a desire to understand a lot of those things anymore, because after deploying a full application environment on all of its infrastructure with Terraform, why would you? Or with all the cool things that you can do, you build a C compiler to do different things, and you have some specializations, and you get so down into the software, like, why do I want to worry about hardware anymore? And I think that there's a consequence to that, because the more abstraction you have, the less you know about the foundations. And I think eventually that could lead to a problem. Like, if something breaks, if something seriously gets broke, who's going to kind of fix it, sort of thing. Because the less, but then you think about, on the flip side, the adverse view to that is, okay, when those things under the hood, like all these layers below, like when there's less people that are interested in it, basically you have a supply problem. So then the supply problem drives a sort of a overcorrection to say, okay, we're going to pay people a lot more to do this now because we don't have anybody to do it. So then you have an influx of folks coming in to do it because there's more money involved. So it's a complicated thing, and with as fast as technology progresses, changes are happening exponentially. Like, instead of with software and applications, instead of pushing out a new release for your application every 6 months, some companies do it many times a day, and that would be unheard of back in the 90s. Like, you wouldn't even think about that. Like, if you went back in time and talked to some folks in the early 90s and said, hey, in 2022, we're going to be doing it like this. We're going to be pushing out iterative updates to our product daily. They would laugh in your face. They'd be like, yeah, right. That's never going to happen. But with the tools and the technology we have available to us now, here we are. We're doing it. So, yeah, it's an exciting time, but there are consequences to things. And, the whole thing is, back to the teamwork and just trying to make the right decision. So everybody's going to have decisions to make, and if they try to do the right decision and take the decision outside of themselves, like, okay, not just maybe what's best for me, but what's better, for those around me too, and even the environment. The environment's huge. To kind of give an example, where I live, many years ago, we'd be 5 inches in snow and it would be 0 degrees outside in December. But this year, I was outside on Christmas Day, um, watching my kid ride his new bike in shorts and a t-shirt because it was like, 75 degrees outside. Well, that just started happening. That's not normal. There's something going on because I've been alive for this long, and now this is happening. So the environment is changing. What are the consequences to all of the stuff that we do that is influencing that and is going to influence it for our children. So try to think of like larger things like that is really important. They have to be in your mind, and you want to make decisions that influence those in a positive way.
So I have a last question.
Sure.
So, what is that particular quality that or a skill that that made you to uh, I mean that helped you in make improving your problem solving ability and made you to uh, solve all the problems that you faced in your technical life?
So this is sort of like a personality trait, I guess, more so than anything. But even if you don't have this personality trait, you can work on it. So if there's something that you don't like in your life, if there's something that is not going the way that you want it to go, well, don't be happy with that. Go to it and face it head on and see what you can change about it immediately. And so there's always an opportunity to make something better. I've been in some situations that were pretty rough over the years, and like looking back, and situations are always worse at the time. You might think that there's no way out of it, or that, oh, this is awful, but no matter how bad it is, you can look it in the eyes and say, hey, we're going to get this taken care of. We're going to nip it now. And with that, do it with a positive attitude. And I know like having a positive attitude, no matter what your circumstances are, is extremely critical. My sort of the take that I try to, what I do, and even like when I was in leadership or with whatever it is that I do, is always stay positive. You can have a situation, you can have 10 things, and none of those things are like very negative and bad, but you could have one of those things that's positive. Well, key in on the positive one and throw the negatives out of your head. And it's really easy. I think Twitter makes this excessively easy for people to be negative and to have a platform to be negative. And it's just not, like, there's some things that need to be said and there's some things that should be said, but anything else, if you're negative or you're putting someone else down, or you even like in your mind, like you cannot put someone down on Twitter or someone else on like another social media platform, but you can even be thinking it. And I'd say thinking these things are dangerous. Like you really have to start out at the source of that negativity or those issues, which is in your head. If you can change your way of thinking to be more positive towards everything you're working on, everything you're doing, you're going to see it's going to pay massive dividends. And always be positive. Even when, at one point I won't bring in the situation, but, I was at a point where, I was in some major trouble, and, I could have lost my cool. I thought I was going to be losing my job at the time. There was a lot of things in flux. There was a lot of layoffs. And there was some crazy things happening. And, I somehow remained positive through the entire scenario. And because of the positivity and going and trying to be positive to others, I actually got a promotion out of the whole thing, which was interesting because, yeah, your attitude can go a long way for you. And yeah, just keep that positive attitude and just know that there's nothing you can't do. Go out and do it. If you don't like something about your situation, well, you can change it and change it.
I'll put your links in the description of this video. People who find our video on YouTube can see the work you're doing and can follow you.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been a really good talk. I went back and listened to some of your previous conversations, and they're really interesting. You have a very diverse, just wide variety of people on your YouTube channel, which is really cool. So
So
yeah,
that,
keep it up.
that's what my next question is. Last question. So what do you say about my questioning in this conversation and about our conversation?
I thought it was a really good conversation. Great job. And, this is I think a lot of, I'd say podcasts or channels out there will focus in on like one, like, okay, it's software development. I'm only going to interview software developers or, this industry or that industry. But you've sort of opened it up to everybody. And you have some just very different personalities on your channel, which is really cool. It's a good variety. And that's awesome because you can learn something from every single one of them. And everybody has a different problems that they've solved and different approach. And knowing about those is just more weapons in your arsenal.
So I did graduation in computer science and engineering and masters in software engineering. So how this video experiences and talking with great people like you who are experienced and who are already into the industry for a long time, how this experience is going to help me in if I work in cloud?
Yeah, so you're growing your network, and the more folks that you know, the more folks that you rub elbows with and talk to, that means you're growing your network, and that's going to help you. You know, the more network you have, the more opportunity you have, and the more you can get your name out there. And yeah, stuff that's it used to be a resume was a handwritten, well, not handwritten, but typed up a few pages, and you had to take in a physical copy. Now a lot of times your online presence is your resume. Like if you blog, that's your resume. You have an online portfolio. Your track record online, that's your history. So, that's going to be the first place that recruiters in the future look, when they vet you. So, yeah.
Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Absolutely.
And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
For sure.
Thank you, William. Keep going, keep doing what you're doing, and keep inspiring people like this.
Certainly. Great conversation, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.